I go, you think she's going to close? And he's like, oh, she'll close. And I don't want to get into more about that, but he was like, she'll close.
There is a moment in this story that stopped seasoned royal observers in their tracks. A moment so revealing, so perfectly encapsulating everything that critics have spent years trying to articulate about Meghan Markle, that even those who had long suspected the truth were left a little breathless when they heard it said so plainly. It came not from a palace insider, not from a royal biographer with decades of access, but from an unexpected source, a woman who had a brief, telling encounter with Meghan's first husband, Trevor Engelson, in the lobby of a private members club in Chicago. And the words Trevor used to describe his ex-wife's pursuit of Prince Harry were not words you forget in a hurry. She'll close. 2 words. And yet those 2 words tell you almost everything you need to know about how Harry, 4-1-year-old father of 2, 5th in line to the British throne and now a somewhat faded figure on the Hollywood circuit, ended up precisely where he is today. Because she'll close is not the language of romance. It is not the language of love at first sight, or 2 souls finding one another across a crowded room. It is the language of business, of strategy, of a deal being made. And the man who said it was the man who had lived it, who had been married to Meghan Markle, who had returned her engagement ring by post when she decided he was no longer useful, and who had clearly, in the privacy of a casual conversation, drawn his own conclusions about exactly what kind of woman his ex-wife truly was. Today we are going to walk through every layer of this story. We are going to look at what Bethany Frankel, close friend of Lauren Sanchez, former star of The Real Housewives of New York, and one of the first major American voices to see through Meghan, revealed about her conversations with Trevor Engelson. We are going to look at what those revelations tell us about the famous vision board, the calculated campaign to land a prince, and the cold-blooded determination that so many people around Meghan have described over the years, but rarely with this kind of evidence. We are going to look at what royal commentators, biographers, and insiders have been saying about the pattern of behavior that Trevor Engelson apparently saw coming long before the rest of us did. And we are going to look at where this leaves Harry now, a 4-1-year-old man, who, according to those closest to the situation, is only beginning to understand the nature of the deal he agreed to all those years ago. Stay with us, because this one goes deep.
The problem you've got here in a relationship with Meghan and Harry is this is a boy that was pretty much traumatized by media presence when he was little. He didn't really want any of this publicity. He was always attacking photographers. And she's someone, ever since she was on the red carpet, who's craved publicity.
To understand why this story matters so much, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the carefully curated fairy tale that Meghan and Harry presented to the world, the blind date arranged by a mutual friend, the camping trip, the whirlwind romance that felt so spontaneous, so organic. You have to go back to what was actually happening in Meghan Markle's life in the years before Harry came along. Because the picture that emerges from people who knew her, worked with her, dated her, and in one case married her, is quite different from the one she has spent years constructing. Meghan Markle was, by most accounts, a driven and highly ambitious woman who had spent years working towards a specific vision of her life. She had mapped out quite literally, it now appears, the kind of existence she wanted. She had a vision board, and according to sources that have now emerged with remarkable consistency, that vision board included images of the British royal family. Meghan has, of course, always denied that her relationship with Harry was anything other than an unexpected love story. She has described being unfamiliar with the royal family, uncertain about Harry's status, charmingly naive about what a relationship with a prince would mean. These claims have always strained credibility. They now strain it considerably further. The context matters for another reason too. When Meghan married Trevor Engelson in 2011, she was a moderately successful actress, best known for small roles and recurring appearances in Suits. She was not yet famous, she was not yet wealthy, she was not yet connected to the kind of world she now inhabits. And yet the people around her at that time have described a woman who was already thinking several moves ahead, who already knew exactly where she wanted to go, and who, when a better opportunity presented itself, moved towards it with a focus and a speed that left Trevor Engelson, by all accounts, genuinely stunned. What Bethany Frankel has now revealed adds a dimension to this story that no amount of palace briefings or carefully worded denials can erase, because Bethany Frankel's account comes directly from the horse's mouth, from the man who was discarded, from the man who, it now turns out, saw the whole thing coming.
I met him like personally. A while.
Somebody set you up.
We met in the lobby of the Soho House in Chicago and just sort of like flirted and then started talking and then met once in LA. Very briefly, we talked about doing a project. He said his ex was a woman from a show called Suits. I didn't know what the show was. I didn't know the woman.
Bethany Frankel is not, it should be said, your average royal commentator. She is a sharp, commercially savvy businesswoman who built a multi-million-dollar brand from scratch and who has a particular gift for reading people and situations with a clarity that cuts through the noise. She is also, as she revealed in her podcast, someone who had a personal encounter with Trevor Engelson, Meghan's first husband, in the years before any of us had heard the name Meghan Markle, in connection with the British royal family. The encounter was, by Frankel's account, casual. They met in the lobby of the Soho House in Chicago. There was, by her description, a flirtation. They spoke, they talked about doing a project together, and during those conversations, Trevor Engelson mentioned, almost in passing, that his ex-wife was a woman from a show called Suits. Bethany Frankel, who openly admits she was unfamiliar with the program, filed this information away and thought little more of it until months later, when photographs began appearing in American celebrity magazines of Prince Harry dating someone. She texted Trevor, "Is this your ex?" And he confirmed that yes, it was. And then Bethany Frankel asked the question that now hangs over this entire story like a neon sign. Do you think she is going to close? And Trevor Engelson, without hesitation, without qualification, without a moment's doubt, said yes, she'll close. Now think about what that means for a moment. This was not a man who was bitter, not a man who was offering a considered psychological analysis of his former partner. This was a man who had been married to Meghan Markle, who knew her intimately, who had watched her operate at close quarters, and his immediate, instinctive response to the question of whether she would land a prince was a quiet, certain, knowing yes, she'll close, like a salesperson who always gets the deal done, like a hunter who never misses, like someone for whom failure is simply not a category that applies. It is worth pausing on just how extraordinary that is, because it means that even the man she left behind, the man whose ring she returned by post, without the dignity of a conversation understood, perhaps better than anyone, that what had happened between them was not a love story that ran its course. It was a transaction, and Harry was the next transaction, a considerably more valuable one.
She'll close. It was absolutely like talking about a deal, and he knew that she would. I thought that was so interesting.
The revelation about the vision board is not new exactly. Meghan Kelly had previously reported that Trevor Engelson told a close friend of hers that Meghan had maintained a vision board which included images of the British royal family. But what Bethany Frankel has now added is something qualitatively different, because Frankel's account is not second-hand. It is not friend of a friend. It is a direct report of what Trevor Engelson said to her personally, in the context of a real conversation, in a moment of unguarded candor that Bethany Frankel clearly found striking enough to remember in precise detail years later. She'll close. He was talking about his ex-wife landing a prince the way you talk about a colleague who always closes the quarterly deal. And this, frankly, is breathtaking. Not just because of what it says about Meghan, but because of what it says about how the people closest to her experience her. Not as a warm, spontaneous, emotionally present woman who stumbles into love, but as someone who is always playing several moves ahead. Someone for whom every relationship, every room, every encounter is an opportunity to be assessed, categorized, and either exploited or discarded. The timing of Bethany Frankel's revelation is also interesting. She had, by her own account, lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in brand deals after speaking critically about Meghan, around the time of the Oprah interview, when Meghan claimed to have felt suicidal and raised questions about race within the royal family. The backlash was swift and commercially punishing, and yet Frankel, who is nobody's fool when it comes to money, has continued to speak, because she knew something that most people didn't. She had the Trevor conversation in her back pocket. And now, with the distance of time and the changing public mood, she has chosen to share it. Why now? Perhaps because the story has reached a point where it can no longer be contained by careful PR management and strategic silence. Perhaps because enough time has passed that the original narrative, poor Meghan, hounded by the British press, forced to flee for her safety, has worn thin enough that the real story can finally breathe. Whatever the reason, the effect is seismic. Because Bethany Frankel is not a fringe commentator. She is a mainstream American celebrity with a huge following and an impeccable instinct for authenticity. When she says she believes Meghan asked for those Kris Jenner party photos to be taken down, because she couldn't be seen consorting with the glamorous and the wealthy, while also positioning herself as understated and philanthropic, people listen. And when she describes Trevor Engelson predicting with quiet certainty that his ex-wife would land a prince, people believe her.
This woman looks to me like a malignant narcissist. This woman has zero self-awareness.
Let us be very clear about what the vision board represents, because Meghan and her supporters have always been quick to dismiss it as a silly conspiracy theory, the preserve of obsessives and royal fanatics with too much time on their hands. But the vision board is not silly. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is, if the accounts of multiple people who knew Meghan at this time are to be believed, a piece of physical evidence of a level of premeditation that goes far beyond anything Meghan has ever publicly acknowledged. Think about what a vision board is. It is an intentional act. You do not accidentally put images on a vision board. You do not absent-mindedly collect photographs of a royal family and pin them to a board without having formed some conscious intention about what they represent to you and where you want to go. A vision board is a declaration of intent. And if that board included images of the British royal family, as Meghan Kelly has reported, and Trevor Engelson apparently confirmed to people close to him, then it is very difficult to escape the conclusion that Meghan Markle had identified the royal family, and specifically perhaps the idea of a royal connection, as a goal, as a destination, as the deal she intended to close. And then she closed it, with a precision and a speed that left everyone around her reeling. She went from appearing on a Suits fan website signing autographs for fans, to walking down the aisle of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle in a Givenchy gown, watched by the world, in the space of a few extraordinary years. And the man who had been discarded along the way, whose ring came back in the post, had apparently seen it coming all along. He knew she'd close, because he'd watched her operate. He'd felt the full force of that focus when it was directed at him. And when it was redirected elsewhere, he understood, with the terrible clarity that comes from personal experience, exactly what had happened. It is the ring returned by post that keeps returning as the detail that most reveals the truth of this. Because that is not the act of someone in emotional pain who cannot face a difficult conversation. That is the act of someone who has already moved on. Someone for whom the previous chapter is so thoroughly closed that even the basic courtesies of a relationship ending do not apply. The ring went by post. And Harry, one suspects, is only now beginning to understand what that means about the woman he married.
The truth about Meghan is she will always find a way in which she thinks she can win. And the casualties are irrelevant, whether it's her father, her old best friends, her first husband. There always will be casualties in her life. The question is, when will Harry become the casualty?
Trevor Engelson has never, to his credit, gone on record to speak at length about his marriage to Meghan Markle or the circumstances of its ending. He has maintained a silence that speaks, in its own way, more loudly than any interview could. But the accounts that have reached us through Bethany Frankel, through Meghan Kelly, through the various friends and associates who have spoken over the years paint a remarkably consistent picture. A picture of a man who was surprised by the speed of the ending, who felt the coldness of it deeply, but who also, when pressed, demonstrated a knowledge of his ex-wife's character that was as precise as it was devastating. She'll close. Those two words are Trevor Engelson's most eloquent contribution to this story. And they are, if you think about them carefully, the most damning assessment anyone has offered of Meghan's pursuit of Harry, not because they are cruel, but because they are clinical. They describe a woman who operates in the language of transaction, in the grammar of the deal, in the world of closing and winning and moving on. They describe someone for whom romance is, at some level, a vehicle for ambition. And they describe, most painfully of all, a man who had been that vehicle and who knew, when a better one came along, exactly what would happen. The broader context of what multiple commentators have noted about Meghan's pattern of behaviour lends enormous weight to this account. Tom Bower, the biographer who spent years researching Meghan's life, and who is widely regarded as one of the most thorough and credible voices on this subject, has spoken repeatedly about what he sees as the casualties of Meghan's upward trajectory. And he has noted something remarkable, that those casualties include her father, her oldest friends, and her first husband, not occasionally, not by accident, but as a pattern. A consistent, repeated, recognizable pattern of people who were useful and then were not. People who were part of the plan until they weren't. People who received the equivalent of a ring in the post. Royal photographer and commentators who have watched the Sussex story unfold from the beginning have consistently noted the same thing, that the warmth Meghan projects in public, the carefully curated image of the compassionate, emotionally present, deeply feeling woman, does not match the accounts of those who have been close to her privately. And Trevor Engelson, the man who knew her most intimately of all, seems to have understood this better than almost anyone.
It's clearly obvious that she decided to target Harry at some point, but yes, it is targeting, it is closing a deal, and we're seeing the fruits of her labours now.
The history here is important, and it is a history that Meghan and her team have worked very hard to obscure, because the Trevor Engelson story is not an isolated incident. It is the first clearly documented chapter in a pattern that has repeated itself with remarkable consistency throughout Meghan's adult life. A pattern of intense connection, strategic advancement, and then a clean, clinical severance when the relationship has served its purpose. Her father, Thomas Markle, was part of this pattern. He was present, involved, affectionate, a working-class man who scraped together money to send Meghan to private school, who supported her acting career, who wept with pride at the prospect of his daughter marrying a prince. And then, when his usefulness became complicated, when he became a liability rather than an asset, he was cut off. Not gradually, not with the difficult conversations that characterize relationships ending on human rather than transactional terms. He was simply removed, the door closed. The ring, so to speak, went in the post. Her oldest friends, the women who had known her before the fame, who had been her support system in the lean years, experienced something similar. One by one, as the Sussex story has unfolded, the friendships of earlier life have dissolved. And in almost every case, the account from those friends where they have been willing to speak describes not a falling out, not a conflict, not a dramatic rupture, but a gradual fading, a lessening of contact, and then nothing. As if the friendship had been a chapter, and the chapter was over, and there was no particular reason to return to it. This is the pattern that Tom Bower has documented, that royal commentators have repeatedly identified, and that Trevor Engelson apparently understood from personal experience. It is the pattern of someone who does not form attachments in the conventional sense, who forms alliances, who builds networks of utility rather than webs of genuine connection, and who, when a better alliance presents itself, pivots towards it with a speed and a focus that leaves those left behind genuinely stunned by the coldness of it. The vision board is the physical manifestation of this pattern, because it demonstrates that Meghan was not simply ambitious in a general sense, not simply a driven woman who wanted success and worked hard for it, which would be entirely admirable. She was ambitious in a specific, targeted, strategic sense. She had identified a destination. She had mapped the route. She had assessed the obstacles. And then she had executed the plan with the kind of focused, relentless efficiency that is, in its own way, quite impressive, while simultaneously being, on a human level, rather chilling.
Harry's just a simp. He just goes along with everything that his wife says and does. He is quite clearly a weak man under the thumb. But Meghan, she is literally the master of her own undoing.
And then there is Harry, 41 years old, father of Archie, who is 7, and Lilibet, who is 4. A man who was, not so very long ago, one of the most beloved members of the British royal family, the funny one, the warm one, the one who seemed to have inherited his mother's gift for genuine human connection. A man who served his country with distinction in 2 tours of Afghanistan, who worked tirelessly on mental health advocacy, who seemed, in the years before Meghan, to be finding his footing in what was always going to be a difficult position, the spare, the second son, the one whose role required both visibility and perpetual self-effacement. What has happened to that man is one of the saddest stories in recent royal history, and the Trevor Engelson revelation adds a new and rather painful dimension to it. Because if Meghan did indeed approach her relationship with Harry as a deal to be closed, if she did identify him as a target, build a strategy around getting close to him, and execute that strategy with the focused efficiency that Trevor apparently recognised as her defining characteristic, then Harry was not a partner in the Sussex project, he was the prize. And prizes, in this kind of transaction, do not get to renegotiate the terms. Those who observe Harry closely have noted, with increasing concern, the deterioration in his demeanour and his prospects over the past few years. The man who was once photographed laughing and relaxed at royal engagements, who was openly affectionate with his family, who seemed to genuinely enjoy the ceremonial aspects of royal life, now appears, in almost every public appearance, to be carrying a considerable weight. He looks, in the bluntest possible terms, unhappy. And commentators who are watching the Sussex story unfold have been saying for some time that Harry is beginning to understand the nature of the situation he is in. Royal commentator Robert Jobson, who is deeply connected to the court of King Charles, and who has been one of the most sober and measured voices on the Sussex story, has offered an assessment so direct that it stopped many people in their tracks. He has described Harry's trajectory leading towards a point where he will be, in his words, a broke, balding ex-royal by the age of 50, not a prince, not a duke in any meaningful sense, not a man with the status and the income and the relevance that his current brand depends upon, just a man who gave up everything for a deal he perhaps did not fully understand he was making. The title's question hangs over all of this, because William, who is 43 and who has watched every chapter of this story with a clarity and a fury that those around him describe in barely veiled terms, has made his position increasingly clear. The dukedom, the HRH, the place in the line of succession, none of these are guaranteed indefinitely, and without them, the Sussex brand becomes something considerably less sellable. Something Trevor Engelson perhaps might recognise, a deal that has reached its natural conclusion.
She is very clever. Her problem is she's not clever enough. She lacks self-awareness. She doesn't realize she's too clever. That is a terrible dilemma to be in, that not recognizing your own limitations.
Let us decode the strategy, because it is important to understand it clearly, not to be unfair to Meghan, but to be honest about what the available evidence now suggests. Because the picture that emerges when you place the Trevor Engelson account alongside the vision board reports, alongside the pattern of relationships that preceded and followed Harry, alongside Bethany Frankel's broader analysis of Meghan's identity crisis, is the picture of a woman who has always been managing an image rather than living a life. Bethany Frankel makes this point with characteristic bluntness. She describes Meghan as someone who is trying to be too many things simultaneously, who cannot ride two horses at once, who cannot position herself as understated and philanthropic, while also turning up to the Kris Jenner birthday party in full Hollywood mode, and then asking for the photographs to be taken down when she realizes they do not fit the brand she is trying to project. It is, Frankel suggests, not that Meghan's desire to be part of that glamorous world is wrong in itself. It is that she is unable to simply own it, unable to commit, unable to decide who she actually is and be that person without apology. And this, according to royal and celebrity commentators alike, is Meghan's central problem. Not that she is ambitious. Ambition is not a character flaw. Not that she wanted more than the life she was born into. Most people want more. But that she has constructed so many versions of herself, has moved through so many identities and so many strategic relationships, that she has lost, if she ever had a stable sense of who she actually is underneath the performance. Tom Bauer has identified this with surgical precision. He has described Meghan as very clever, genuinely, impressively intelligent, but lacking the self-awareness to recognize her own limitations. She is not clever enough to see that she is too clever, and in that gap between intelligence and self-awareness, all the disasters of the Sussex story have been born. The Oprah interview that was supposed to be the definitive repositioning and instead accelerated the collapse of her British reputation. The Netflix deal that was supposed to establish them as content creators and instead exposed the thinness of their actual star power. The podcast. The lifestyle brand. The attempts to associate themselves simultaneously with royalty and Hollywood and philanthropy and celebrity and activism and authenticity all at the same time, all without committing to any of them. And underneath all of it, apparently, a first husband who knew from the beginning that she'd close, who had watched her operate, who had experienced the focused, strategic, cold-blooded efficiency of her ambition from the closest possible vantage point, and who, when the next deal came along, found himself standing on the wrong side of the door, holding nothing but a returned ring.
Meghan is trying to be so many different things, and I just don't think that she herself is fully aware of who she is. So you can't be I can be authentic, exactly who I am. Piss people off, don't piss them off. I know where I stand and I make mistakes. I'll come back to the line. But like, it's very difficult to be front and center at the Kardashian 70th party and then also be many of the things
that she wants to be.
The lies, or at least the significant distortions of the truth at the heart of the Sussex story, are well documented at this point. But the Trevor Engelson revelation gives them a new context that makes them considerably more difficult to dismiss, because the central lie, if we are going to call it that, is the lie of spontaneity, the lie that this was all unexpected, that Meghan stumbled into the royal family by accident, fell in love without quite understanding what she was getting into, and found herself overwhelmed by the scrutiny and the pressure and the racism that she encountered within those ancient walls. The vision board makes this lie almost impossible to sustain. If you have pictures of the British royal family on your vision board, if you have, in effect, declared your intention to be associated with that world, then you cannot simultaneously claim to have been blindsided by it. You cannot credibly describe yourself as naively unprepared for the realities of royal life, if royal life was something you had, apparently, been actively working towards for years. The preparation and the naivety are mutually exclusive. You cannot have both. And yet Meghan has consistently claimed both, has described herself as unfamiliar with Harry's status, as someone who Googled him and found images of his ginger hair, as someone who had to be persuaded that a relationship was even possible given the peculiarities of his position. These are charming stories. They are well told. They land well in interviews. But they do not coexist comfortably with a vision board. They do not coexist comfortably with she'll close. They do not coexist comfortably with the account of a first husband who had apparently watched Meghan operate at close enough quarters to know, with immediate and unwavering certainty, that when his ex-wife identified a target, the target did not escape. What is particularly striking is the Poppy incident, which Bethany Frankel also addresses with characteristic directness. The suggestion that Meghan could not track down a poppy for Remembrance Day when her husband was wearing one, when their long-standing security officer was wearing one, when poppies are, as Frankel pointedly notes, not exactly impossible to find, is of a piece with the broader pattern. It is a small thing, but it is the kind of small thing that reveals the larger truth. That Meghan's relationship with performance and authenticity is complicated, at best. That the careful, curated image and the actual behaviour beneath it do not always align. And that the people who know her best, the Trevor Engelsons and the Bethany Frankels of her world, are increasingly, and rather publicly, saying so.
She doesn't know how to be any one person. She's got no personality herself, so she just latches onto something, is my belief. And she goes, right, this is what I'm going to be right now. And then she gets bored of it, and then she moves on.
The deeper stakes of this story are about legacy, and they are about children. And they are about what the next decade looks like for two people who have made choices that cannot easily be unmade. Archie is 7, Lilibet is 4. They are growing up in a very specific world, a world constructed by their parents, with its own rules and its own logic and its own particular version of what their identity means. They are the children of a duke and a former duchess. They have royal blood and American citizenship, and a life in California that bears no resemblance to the life their cousins George, 12, Charlotte, 11, and Louis, 8, are living in Britain. And the question that commentators are beginning to ask, with increasing seriousness, is what that means for Archie and Lilibet in 10, 15, 20 years' time. Because the Sussex brand, the thing that justifies the Netflix deals and the speaking fees and the association with celebrities and philanthropists, is built on the royal connection. It is the HRH, the title, the proximity to the throne that gives Harry and Meghan their commercial value. Without it, they are simply a couple of celebrities in their 40s who were once quite famous. And celebrities in their 40s who were once quite famous are not, in the current Hollywood market, particularly bankable. Tom Bower has noted, with the kind of precision that comes from years of forensic research, that Harry's worst fear has always been irrelevance. That even in the early days of the Sussex project, there were people around him who understood that the further he drifted from the royal family, the more his star would fade. And the pace at which that fading is now occurring has surprised even those who predicted it. Robert Jobson's assessment broke, balding, ex-royal by 50 is brutal. But it is not, given the trajectory of the past few years, obviously wrong. And this is what makes the Trevor Engelson story so significant as a matter of long-term consequence. Because if Meghan did approach her relationship with Harry as a transaction, as a deal to be closed, then at some point the deal will have served its purpose, or it will have failed to serve its purpose. And the question that hangs in the air, unasked by anyone in polite company, but clearly forming in the minds of those watching closely, is what happens then? What happens when the deal is done? What happens to the man who was the prize?
Meghan was warmly welcomed in Britain, that everyone in the royal family tried their very, very hardest to make her feel at home and accommodate her, but that unfortunately Meghan only wanted to be the star and made it impossible for her and the royal family to collaborate.
The palace, characteristically, has said nothing. The institution does not comment on individual stories about former members of the royal family, and it is not about to start. But the silence of the palace should not be mistaken for indifference, because those who are close to the court of King Charles, and, perhaps more importantly, to the orbit of William and Catherine, describe a watching brief that is far from passive. William, who is 43, and who has been described by those who know him well as having the long memory of a man who has been genuinely, deeply hurt, is understood to have formed his views about Meghan with considerable precision. He had reservations before the wedding. He raised concerns that were, in the event, overridden by his father's desire to see his younger son settled and happy. Those reservations have since been more than vindicated, and William is not a man who forgets being ignored. He is also not a man who acts rashly. He plans, he waits, he acts when the time is right. The question of the titles is the most immediate practical expression of this. Prince William, as the future king, has the ability to reshape the landscape of royal titles in ways that would have a material and significant impact on the Sussex brand. The removal of the dukedom, the HRH, the formal royal status that gives Harry and Meghan their commercial leverage, these are options that exist and that are being discussed, not in hushed, hypothetical terms, but with the kind of purposeful deliberation that suggests they are being actively planned. Robert Jobson has confirmed this in terms that are as direct as anything that has ever been said on the record about William's intentions. Hugo Vickers, the preeminent royal historian and biographer who has access to and credibility within royal circles that very few others possess, has documented the impact of the Sussex story on the late Queen in terms that are, on reflection, devastating. The Queen's final years, which should have been a triumphant culmination of a 70-year reign, were clouded by the drama, the accusations, the public revelations, and the institutional damage caused by a couple who had left but could not, it seemed, stop looking back. The Platinum Jubilee, which should have been an uncomplicated celebration, was complicated by their presence, and those who served the Queen closely have not forgotten that.
Meghan is completely inauthentic. Her only authenticity is in her inauthenticity.
The broader warning of this story is not really about Meghan Markle or Trevor Engelson or vision boards or closed deals. The broader warning is about the nature of authenticity, about what it means to be a genuine person in a world where performance and reality have become so thoroughly entangled that even the performers sometimes lose track of the difference. Bethany Frankel, who is not given to philosophical reflection but who has an instinct for human truth that is sharper than most, puts it simply. Meghan, she says, doesn't know who she is. She is trying to be too many things. She cannot commit to the Hollywood version of herself, and she cannot commit to the royal-adjacent, philanthropic, understated version either. She oscillates between them, reaching for both, belonging fully to neither. And in that oscillation, she reveals something about the cost of a life lived primarily in terms of strategy rather than authenticity. Tom Bauer has described this in terms of self-awareness. Paula Froelich has described it in terms of inauthenticity, noting, with a wit that cuts deep, that Meghan's only authenticity is in her inauthenticity. These are not random attacks from people who dislike Meghan personally. They are observations forensic, consistent, corroborated by multiple sources about a particular kind of character. A character that can be brilliant at pursuit, at closing, at getting what it has decided it wants, but that is less brilliant at the thing that comes after, at being in a relationship, in a community, in an institution, with the kind of genuine reciprocity and vulnerability and self-disclosure that sustains connection over time. The people who know her seem, almost universally, to leave. The friendships dissolve, the alliances fracture, the ring comes back in the post. And even those who admired her from a distance, who wanted to believe the best of her, who championed her as a symbol of modernity and diversity and the reinvention of an ancient institution, have found, over time, that the admiration is difficult to sustain when the evidence keeps pointing in the same direction. She'll close, and when she has closed, she moves on. And the people left standing in her wake are left to work out, as Trevor Engelson apparently did, what they were actually part of.
Harry and Meghan are the common denominator with all of it. They are hard to work for, they're hard to work alongside, they seem to be hard to retain any sort of friendship. I've said it so many times, but they're the architects of their own demise.
Where things stand now between the Sussexes and the royal family is a question that analysts and commentators answer differently, depending on their proximity to the situation and their generosity of spirit. The optimistic reading is that there is still, buried under the lawsuits and the television interviews and the memoir revelations and the public accusations, some residual family feeling that might eventually find a way to express itself. That Harry and his father, and perhaps even Harry and William, might one day find a path back to something not to what they were, but to something livable. The less optimistic reading, which is the one that those with the closest knowledge of the situation seem to favour, is that the damage has been done in ways that cannot be undone by time or goodwill alone. The things that were said on television, on record, in a best-selling memoir about the palace, about family members, about the institution itself, are not things that can be unsaid. They exist, they are permanent, and they have caused a kind of harm that is not quickly healed. Lady Colin Campbell, who has some of the most penetrating and well-informed analysis of the royal family's internal dynamics of any commentator currently working, has described the family as having largely moved on from Harry, as having closed the door on him, not in anger exactly, but in a quiet, definitive way that suggests they no longer expect things to be different. The relationship between Harry and William is the most significant and the most painful of these severed connections. These were brothers who were, for years, genuinely close, who shared a mother, shared a childhood, shared the peculiar and complicated experience of growing up in the most scrutinized family in the world, and who now exist, it seems, in entirely separate orbits, rarely in communication, certainly not in anything approaching warmth. Those who know William describe his feelings about Harry as a mixture of grief and fury that has, over time, settled into something colder and more implacable. He will do what needs to be done. He will protect the institution. He will not be moved by sentiment. The Kris Jenner party episode is, in this context, rather telling, because it illustrates, with crystalline clarity, the fundamental problem of the Sussex position. They are no longer royal enough for the royal family, but they are also, as Frankel notes, not quite Hollywood enough for Hollywood. They want the Clooneys, and they've lost the Clooneys. They want to be associated with the Beckhams and the Obamas, and the kind of global prestige that comes from genuine substance, and those doors, one by one, are closing. What remains is the Kardashian circuit, which is not nothing. But it is also, for a man who was once fifth in line to the British throne, a rather dramatic illustration of the distance travelled.
And that's the thing about Meghan. She's a very, very deceitful person.
Zoom out far enough, And this story is about something that has always been at the heart of the British royal family's relationship with the modern world. It is about what happens when the very private world of monarchy, with its codes and its protocols and its expectations of discretion and service, collides with the very public world of celebrity, where transparency is currency and oversharing is a business model. The collision has been, to put it mildly, dramatic, and the casualties have been significant on both sides. But the Trevor Engelson story adds a dimension to this that is worth sitting with, because it suggests that the collision was not accidental, that it was not the result of a naive woman being overwhelmed by an institution she did not understand. It suggests, rather, that the institution was deliberately targeted, that the most ancient and most carefully guarded family in the world was, in effect, closed, like a deal, like a quarterly target, like the item at the top of someone's vision board. And what does that mean for the monarchy? In the short term, perhaps less than it might seem. The royal family is ancient, resilient, and possessed of a capacity for self-preservation that has seen it navigate crises far graver than the Sussex one. George, Charlotte, and Louis, those three children being raised so carefully, so thoughtfully, so deliberately by William and Catherine, represent a future that is already taking shape in ways that are, by all accounts, genuinely encouraging. George, at 12, is already attending significant events, showing an interest, a seriousness, a sense of duty that speaks well of how he is being raised. The institution will survive this chapter. But in the longer term, the Trevor Engelson story is a reminder that the royal family's greatest vulnerability has always been romantic, that the carefully constructed world of duty and protocol and public service can be penetrated by someone who understands that the way in, the only way in, is through the heart of one of its members. Harry's heart was, by his own account, easily captured. He was lonely. He was searching. He was perhaps more susceptible than he knew to the kind of focused, intense, devoted attention that Meghan, by all accounts, provided in the early stages of their relationship. He didn't see the vision board. He didn't know about the closed deals and the returned rings. He saw a woman who seemed to understand him, who seemed to love him without reservation, who seemed to be exactly what he needed. Whether that impression was genuine, in whole or in part, is a question that only Meghan can answer. But what Trevor Engelson apparently knew from personal experience was that the impression Meghan makes and the reality of who she is are not always the same thing. She'll close, he said, and she did. And now Harry, at 41, is beginning to understand what that means, what it costs, and what, if anything, remains when the deal is done. So what do you make of it all? Here is the question I want to leave you with, the one that I suspect will stay with you long after this video ends. If you had been in Bethany Frankel's position, if a man had told you, quietly and with complete certainty, that his ex-wife would close any deal she set her sights on, would you have believed him? And if you had believed him, would it have changed anything? Because Harry presumably was never told. Nobody showed him the vision board. Nobody passed on the quiet, knowing words of the man who had been left behind. He walked into that relationship with all the hope and all the vulnerability of a man who had been looking for love for a very long time. And perhaps that is the saddest part of this whole story. Not the strategy, not the vision board, not the ring in the post, but the fact that somewhere underneath all of it, there was a real man who really loved her. And whatever she gave him in return, it may not have been quite what he thought it was. And the second question, perhaps the harder one, what do you think happens next? Where does Harry go from here? Is there a version of this story that ends well for him? I genuinely want to know what you think. Thank you so much for watching today. I mean that sincerely. This community, your comments, your insights, your willingness to engage with these stories with intelligence and nuance and genuine feeling is what makes doing this worthwhile. Every day I am genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of this audience. If today's video resonated with you, if it made you think or made you feel or made you want to know more, please do hit the like button. It makes an enormous difference to how this channel grows and how many people we can reach. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone you think would find it as fascinating as you did. There is so much more to come. I will see you tomorrow.